Good morning, everybody, and thank you for attending. We're going to get started kind of out of the gate here. Our session today is around using technology to engage employees, and specifically on creating an engaging culture. This is a really, really big topic that we continue to find trending in the marketplace. A lot of research is being done, and one of the great things that we're seeing is a lot of new opportunities that technology is offering. I do just want to do a couple house cleaning notes just so you're aware. We're going to send the slides out from the presentation today in an email. So go ahead and look for those if you have any questions. My name is Tyson Fuehrer. I'm here at Biggs Insurance, and I'm the current vice president, but also the leader for the life and health department. So I get to have the opportunity of having these conversations quite frequently with clients and really actually enjoy them a lot. When we talk about what is employee engagement, because there's a lot of questions and a lot of definitions around it, and quite frankly, it's going to be up to the employer and how they define that. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. But what we know when we're measuring these things is there's a lot of data coming out. But one of the leading organizations out there that are doing a lot of the looking and researching into this stuff is a Gallup. You probably heard a lot of different Gallup polls that are out there, but when they test the United States, and this is a number that comes out pretty frequently as well, 70% of the workers in the U.S. are not engaged in how they quantify it. So there's a couple different factors that they use, but what we know is that it's definitely a powerful tool when you actually have engaged employees, and we'll be able to kind of point out a couple things regarding the impact regarding to revenue and expenses and production and all the other kind of key things that people are looking for. But really, when we're talking about employee engagement, we want to define it at the employer level. Sorry, flipped too far there. And maybe I'll mention this real quick too. If you do have any questions, feel free to do a little hand raise on the right-hand side in the control panel to the right. You might have minimized it with that little red arrow. You can ask a question, do the little chat thing. I think there's a little hand raise option too. So feel free to pop in a question. We'll maybe have to hold off until the end. Most likely this presentation is going to take us about 15-20 minutes. So we'll have some time at the end to give back, most likely too. But when we talk about what is it and why is it important, right? I mean, that's probably the biggest thing, because there's usually is some type of an investment, whether it's resources or financial or whatever, when we're talking about engagement. But there's a lot of factors that happen inside the workplace. And Google, the actual organization, studied its own workers, and how they defined engagement was based off a couple key elements. And what they were looking in and how they bucketed it was psychological safety, dependability, structure and clarity, the meaning of work, and also impact of work. So those are, when they're looking at their own employees, those 5 pillars is what they work off of. And so they're really trying to help and find out what engaged employees in those specific areas. But companies are really different, and so every single one of them, whether you're blue collar, white collar, in between, maybe you have multiple locations, a lot of remote access, younger employees, old, more experienced employees, all the different combinations. The engagement kind of changes based off the company's goals, and so there really has to be a process to find and create the ones that are important to the company. And so that's really critical. And we're going to talk a little bit about the technology that can help about with that too. But ROI is really in the next question. When we get into these conversations with our clients, many times the CFOs get pulled in, or CEOs get pulled in, because the proposals definitely have to do with a top-down involvement. And so they want to say, well, why am I spending my time on that, right? And what's the ROI in this? What's the return on investment? So there really has to be an incentive to raise employee engagement levels. So that's obviously some type of investment. So what's the return? But there's a lot of studies out there that are actually showing, as you improve engagement, you're also improving their performance. What's net result of that, when you're talking ROI, is revenue. Operational expenses get better. And so this stat here that you're going to see is, when you looked at, the UK actually did a study, and it's actually a pretty large study. I looked over a 12-month period of time, and what they were looking at is that when engagement was high, it increased the operating income of the company by 19%. That's a huge number. I mean, if you start, depending upon how big your company is, and look at what your actual operating expenses are, and you take a 20% chunk of that because you've got an engaged workforce, you got a massive amount of cash to reinvest in the company and do a lot of different things. However, in this same study, when they were looking at it, they found a lot of companies with low engagement as well. And so when they were able to measure that, they saw their revenues drop by about 33% over the same period of time, meaning that if you started in January and you did your measurement of engagement, and they had their different pillars that they were looking at there, but as that workforce became less and less engaged, and there's a lot of different reasons for this, they were, these companies on average were seeing, a third of their revenue. So this is not operating income or net expenses, but they saw a third of their revenue actually dropping over that 12-month period of time. So when you're doing your ROI calculations and you're seeing that kind of revenue coming off the table, that can be really shocking, and definitely makes a lot of concerns about how you make this whole thing work. So those two stats are probably something that would be important. People are really looking at the details to try to figure out, what does it mean to me? Because that's great for these companies, but until you can actually, produce the results, it's a little bit different. But there are a couple key motivators when we're talking about engagement, and this is a study that was done by a couple professors at Harvard, so some pretty smart dudes put this thing together and found that research that they were doing and conducted is that there were 6 main reasons why people work. They work because they like it, it's fun, it's purposeful, it has potential, right? So those 3 things. There's also other reasons why people work, where there's emotional pressure to be involved. Economic pressure. People are, typically working for a paycheck at some level, and then just general inertia. What was interesting about this study, and when they kind of dug back into it, is that they found the top half, those first 3 things, fun, purpose, and potential, were really the things that drove engagement, and for getting those high producing type of employees. And it doesn't matter which generation that you're talking about, but when you're able to get people engaged because it's fun and that they felt a purpose, and that there was potential for growth, all of those 3 things, it doesn't matter what level. I mean, if you're even, swinging a mop around and cleaning floors, if you can find ways to engage that way with those employees, their production and what they're able to kick out to the company and return back is phenomenal. And that's where you get back to that 19% increase in operating profits. However, on the flip side of that is that if you had employees that were stuck in that job due to emotional pressure, and there's a lot of different things that can play into that, economic pressure, and also inertia, there was a ton of challenges for keeping those employees, and turnover was extremely high. And those are those same folks that you would say fall into that bucket, or those organizations that fall into that bucket of having that 33% reduction in revenue. And you can imagine just why. I mean, if you're showing up to work and you're just showing up and you got a paycheck, you're frustrated, right? I mean, it's not fun, particularly depending upon what that paycheck looks like. And then the emotional pressure can be just as bad. And so stress, those kind of things, financial stress can be another one, even though it's kind of an economic thing, but it can affect you emotionally too. However, when you're talking about engagement programs, there's definitely some potential for downsides. And so these are a couple key factors that people have found when you're talking about doing this engagement thing, because you want to be careful with it when you want to do it right, because otherwise you can create an environment of complacency, which is where you've got employees that feel too comfortable out there and sharing different things and creating kind of conflict and issues within the organization. And that's completely the opposite direction that you want. And what they found there is that stagnation is created because everyone's kind of complaining about a whole bunch of different stuff and really not getting anything done. And so all the potential and innovation and all the ideas that can come from, engaging with those employees and getting the best ideas from them goes right down the drain. So they go the opposite direction, actually. So that's one potential downside in making sure you're doing engagement correctly. Thought manipulation as well is another category. And so engagement, and I'll just read this out, engagement does not inherently instruct employees to think positive thoughts. However, tight-knit groups tend to be more adverse to criticizing one another because they're more trusting, more willing to be involved that way, and analyzing other ideas and processes are crucial inside of the process. So what does that mean? Thought manipulation is that you want to make sure that you're doing and guiding employees through an engaging process that's actually getting them to think about the potential, right? When we were talking about those first three options earlier, we want to really help them think about what's the potential out there and engaging that way versus just coming up with what's wrong, with your workplace, which is where, again, you get back to complacency. The other thing that happens, this is kind of an interesting one. Favoritism can happen in the workplace. When you've got engaged employees, they're high energy, they're excited, they're really involved, they're working with management and getting projects and ideas out there on the plate. And so a lot of times the people that are not quite as engaged start to think that there's favorites going on in the organization, and then that can also be demotivational as well. So when you've got to have this as a multi-tier thing, so you've got these early adopter kind of people, and then you've got, the rest, some more of your population that may not be as much. And so you want to balance them out and try to find ways to engage both populations, which might mean that you're not having them both working on the same project at the same time. But if you create a favoritism situation, then you've got people going the wrong way, okay? The other piece is burnout. When you have all these great ideas and you're trying to engage and you're doing all these extra things in the workplace that are outside of what their regular job is, there's a potential for burnout too, right? Because, maybe they're working more than 40 hours to try to accomplish this stuff, and it's things that they're really like and they're really excited, and then they're, trying to get back to their email and the phone calls and other kind of things, and there's all this stuff just starting adding up, and then they just kind of implode, right? And so now you've got this great employee that you're losing because there's too much that's gone on through these engagements. So measuring, how involved they are and how excited they are about the workplace, and measuring that is super, super important. So those are some potential downsides around engagement. So I just want to kind of bring those up too. And again, I'm going to send these slides out so you can have a copy of them if you like. But as I mentioned earlier, creating engagement strategies are super important, and every company is different. I mean, just giving you a roadmap and saying this is what worked for one person isn't only worked for one person, right, or one company. So, where do you want to start at? And gathering data is really critical to get this started, because it's the only way to figure out what's working for your company, like what really works for your company, not what you think works for your company, is to get people engaged around just getting information from them. And again, remembering the difference between creating an engaging culture versus a complacent culture and the questions that you're asking. And one of the biggest downsides when you're sent out, if you're going to use a survey as kind of your first start, is that you better be willing to respond. Because if you send these things out, you're gathering information, you're going to immediately create a complacent situation, complacent culture. If you ask them all these questions and they're bringing up all these ideas and you're like, oh, that sounds good, that's great, I'm super excited about that, and it goes nowhere, okay? And so, that's why I mentioned earlier about having top-down buy-in into what you're doing before you go down this road. There's a lot of market research out there you can do, use employee focus groups. So let's say you start the survey, and then you say, oh, you know what, there's a couple of categories I'd be curious about that. You pull a couple of people from different departments in, you do a focus group to get even further inside of the thing, and then you do some brainstorming on how to solve the problem, right? And then you kind of measure it and keep moving from there. So a lot of strategies can be formed. And as you can imagine, I'm guessing you're thinking right now, we got all this stuff, right? That you're bringing up and different ideas, and we got to get the management involved, and we've got to get get buy-in from them, and then we got to create these surveys, and we got to why technology? Well, technology is the thing that's going to make it simple, right? There's a little bit of a cost to it, and it's actually nowadays, because there's so many different options out there, the cost continues to drive down, but it's the way to make it simple, okay? And there's a lot of people out there, or a lot of companies out there, that are making it super simple for organizations. And this is a couple different areas that they can be used in. So we see surveys out there, as we mentioned. I mean, that's probably the simplest one. You can probably heard of like SurveyMonkey and some of these other kind of things that are out there. But surveys are might be the beginning point. But as I mentioned earlier too, is that you want to have this as an ongoing measurement tool too. So there's a lot of really cool tools out there for that. Some of the trending thing that's coming in around technology is letting people use their own personal stuff for this, like their own cell phone. Most everybody's got a smartphone out there. It's pretty rare nowadays that they don't. or have access that way. And so, many times they're willing to, to jump on some of this stuff, maybe on their break, or during another time during the day, or maybe while they're at home. You have to be kind of careful with making sure that you're documenting time and not, stepping on our reading lines there, but giving them access and also giving them time to be able to work off their own personal device because they're comfortable with it. They're used to using it. And if they're used to using it and you can pull in some kind of engagement item into that, now they're going to be looking at their phone all the time and they're going to be engaged more. Okay, it's super simple because it's kind of part of their normal flow. A lot of collaborative learning inside of technology, so education, that kind of stuff. The cool stuff is, particularly for the younger generations, is this gamification idea. And what I mean by that is that, there's a lot of, say, mobile apps that you can, and I saw one the other day that took an employee handbook and basically created a game out of it. And so you can imagine, when you normally hand a handbook, it's like 70 pages long. You say, hey, sign the end of it. What do? They sign it. They never read it. They never get engaged. They don't understand what's going on with the company. And some of the really important things get left out. Well, you can make a game out of it, get them excited about kind of competing inside of this thing. If it's within the culture of the organization or if it's where you want to take the culture to, now they're going to start reading. They're going to have to look up stuff and get more involved that way, answer questions, and they'll actually start to remember more about what's going on and helping the company grow and hold to its values. One of the things that's really nice and something we're actually doing here at Biggs is this peer-to-peer recognition idea. Just giving someone a kudo and saying, hey, great job. Thanks for doing this for me this week. Those things can go a really long ways. And so technology can be used in a really simple way, and it does not have to take a lot of time. As I mentioned earlier, mobile learning is definitely another one out there. But ultimately, the biggest thing that technology is doing is it's helping reduce the administrative resources it's taking otherwise to be able to do the same thing. So when you're dealing with that, and just to give you an example, if you were having to conduct a survey and you got 100 employees, trying to coordinate all 100 employees and get them into a meeting, passing out a bunch of paper, getting all the stuff back, adding it all up, taking it back out in another piece of paper or something like that. It takes a lot of time and a lot of resources. Technology can do it, with a simple upload and a send out, and there you go. You're out the door and ready to go, and able to measure ongoing. Some people also ask the question, can employee engagement work for small businesses? And I'd like to share this study with you. It's one that was done by the state of Colorado with an organization called Truven, which is an analytics company. And so they studied 121 businesses that had about almost 2,500 workers in it. They do the math on that. That's basically about 20 employees per business that was being studied to be able to prove ROI for those type of organizations. Because this comes up a lot. The United States was built on small business. That's not going anywhere. And so you want to be able to make sure this thing scales down and scales up. It can't just be for the Microsofts and the Googles, right? And so what they found inside this study is that the workplace programs, what the engagement had to include was these things: health education, links to employee services, a supportive physical and social environment, integration of health promotion, employee screenings with adequate treatment and follow-up. Okay, if all of those items were put into play, for every dollar that was invested, $2.03 was returned on average. Okay, so small business, using these categories, we're able to return back that kind of thing. Some of the other things that it affected, because they were doing a little bit more, particularly related to healthcare costs, actually showed some pretty significant reductions in some of the bad trends that would relate to people feeling good. Physical health can relate to things. That it can also deal with emotional, other kind of things there. It's a really nice way to prove, thanks to the state of Colorado for doing that, but it actually proves that small business can actually benefit as well. So let me show you a case study, right? Because, as I mentioned, one business's options is kind of one business's option, but sometimes this helps relate how technology would look. So this is a case study of a company that's got about $8 million, or about 50 employees in it or so, okay? And what they did is they broke it down by 7 steps, okay? They used an employee survey to seek input and know what areas are most on fire, okay? That kind of sounds like, maybe something you may not want to do because, again, it could create a complacent environment. But, this company was a little bit concerned about their culture and really wanted to jump into it and just knew from the top down that we're just going to attack this no matter which way it happens. So let's just find out what's going on because we don't feel good about what's going on throughout the company. Then an employee meeting, so step 2 for them, they had an employee meeting to discuss the results of what the input was and to paint a picture of what the employer response was going to be with a timeline, okay? So basically they said, look, we're going to get the survey, here's what the results were, so everyone was on page because not everyone's going to have the same answers, so we kind of want to say, hey, here's kind of what the common answers were, and then here's what the things that we're going to do. So they formed a committee, and they said, here's what the employer response is going to be, and here's how fast we're going to do it. They began using a product, a technology product called FridayFeedback.com. Feel free to look it up. Really inexpensive. There's a real free trial, and I'm not being paid by that. It's just to let you know it's one of the things out there, and quite frankly, there's probably about 15,000 to choose from. This is just one that is really simple. They did that, and they used it to collect weekly input on their employees on how the organization was performing. So they did this initial survey to try to get information so they could start building and starting to solve some problems. And then what they wanted to do is have an ongoing quick survey that only had 4 open-ended questions in it, and all of that took 5 minutes. It was sent through email, it was automated, no one had to touch anything, and it had simple reports. It was not a mandatory item, and this is kind of interesting too, because when you look at the Google study, their reports and their research is based off of a non-mandatory study too. And what they found was that the people that didn't respond, there was a very high percentage of those that typically led to turnover. And so their analytics and metrics actually started to do a couple things around engagement, but also preparing for that employee to leave, if they weren't able to do it, because they knew within a certain period of time, if they didn't start engaging around the studies, they would actually go away. But this organization, that's what they did there. They actually put a biometric screening, so that was one of the things that they wanted to get involved in around healthcare and getting people to know their numbers, kind of thing. So if you've got employees that have high blood pressure or are diabetic or hypertensive or something like that, and don't know it, they just know they don't feel very good at work, and because they don't feel like they can miss any work or pay for the copay to go in the office, this is a way for the company to basically make a quick investment to be able to get the employees to be aware of what's going on with their own bodies. The data from the biometric screening was synced up with another technology called Spark, which is a platform that employees can log into to see their results from the biometric screening. But the other thing that was really cool about it is that it built a personal health challenges for that individual. So not by the company, but that individual. So if they're pre-diabetic, you could actually set up, the personal health challenge might be go get a preventive screening. By the way, did you know it doesn't cost anything? Do you want any help with that? Okay. In addition to that, within the Spark portal, they had the top 10% of those employees receive a personal health coaching challenge, right? So other people were, maybe doing a step challenge or doing some nutrition stuff or whatever else was going on there. But the people that had the top 10 risks, those are the things like heart disease and those kind of things. Those people actually were challenged to actually meet with a coach. And that coach was able to help navigate, or the idea behind that was get engaged with that individual and help them navigate whatever's going on. And there's a lot of different things that could be happening for that individual. So having that coach kind of be that health assistant for that matter was a really nice way. That showed really that the company cared, right? And it wasn't like they weren't forcing it down their throat, but they were actually trying to help them out and organize that way. They hired a wellness coordinator to organize an additional 3 corporate challenges. And so those corporate challenges were based off of the input that they had on that timelines that I mentioned in the first step there. But that wellness coordinator actually also worked with the employee assistance program, which a lot of people have those, but nobody knows what they are and how they work. So the wellness coordinator built out a communication plan that was based off of email and sent out at least once a month on a new topic around what was going on or how to access and use the EAP. So you're talking about gym discounts and mental health counseling and some of these other kind of things that these EAPs are used for that most people just don't understand. In addition, how to use your health plan, those kind of things, and other pieces that came out of the survey that the employees didn't understand about the organization. Like, they may respond back and say, well, we don't have this. Well, the company's had it for 10 years, just nobody knew about it, right? And so the coordinator is actually part of the communication strategy. The great thing is that wellness coordinators can come at a really inexpensive rate. The Spark portal is only like $3 a head. The Friday feedback program is like $5 a head. And so total investment for that organization of 50 employees was like $10,000, almost $11,000 a year. Okay. Now, like I said at the beginning, you have to get top-down approval to be able to put some kind of investment together, and then we got to be able to show the ROI on it. Okay. So that's super important. Otherwise, it won't go anywhere. But I mean, if you think that this company is probably spending somewhere between $250,000 to $300,000 a year in premiums on their healthcare costs, I mean, you're talking probably 3 to 4% and more on their renewal if they put in a whole program like this. And what would it look different by having this kind of thing in with that organization to get it launched and be able to maintain? And if you look here, how many extra things are internal staff members having to do? As far as the administrative side of things, really not that much. Okay, so we haven't really asked for a new administrative load on it either for a really inexpensive price, and that's what technology is able to drive. When you break down the case study, as I mentioned earlier in that Colorado study, if you break down the case study and say, look, you have to have all those 5 things to be able to make sure the program works. Well, health education was an item. Well, we've got this wellness coordinator and it does that. Links to employee services, the EAP and the Spark portal were part of that. Supportive physical social environments. You have the EAP again, the Friday feedback program, so that you get the surveys and those kind of things going on. They had corporate challenges, personal health challenges. Integration of health promotion was another one. Again, the wellness coordinator is kind of the one quarterback and all the information and getting everything set up there. And then you have employee screens with adequate treatment and follow-up. We have the biometric screenings linked with health coaching. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, that the premium is somewhere around $250,000. Additional investment only costs them 4% increase on the current cost. Yeah, of course, healthcare costs are expensive, but you know what? If they're not using it, what's it worth? Nothing, right? The anticipated ROI on that on a 2-to-1 ratio, you're probably talking about $22,000 of savings. And if you really got into the meat of it and were able to measure operational expenses, and we don't have that on this case study, but if we were able to measure operational expenses within that 12-month period of time, you can just imagine an $8 million company what that return could be in the investment and what it could look like. The great thing is that measurement is super simple for the organization to track, and I'll tell you, when you're talking about doing these kind of things and what employees want when they're trying to have the company show that they care and getting engaged, this right here is very simple, almost 100% technology based and measurable for your ROI. Okay. So we're we're almost 30 minutes into it. Perfect. Okay, so last thing here, just want to kind of wrap it up. Engagement in practice, meaning what's employee engagement when you're actually, when the rubber meets the road. Employee engagement is going to be linked to reduced turnover rates. It's going to be linked to increasing productivity. It's going to be making the organization more efficient with increased profits. And all experts are agreeing that when you actually get an engagement program, you really have to have top-down commitment. You have to define what the engagement is going to look like for your organization. You have to measure and score the engagement levels, not just once, but on an ongoing basis. All those things, again, are things that technology can help with. Here at Biggs, we're very excited to be able to work with companies that have this in mind and want to at least try to figure out a way to make it work. We're very experienced in it, and we've been doing it for quite some time and really addressing this healthcare trend, which what we're finding most businesses are ranking in the top 2, above healthcare costs for that matter, which is pretty interesting to me. So again, my name is Tyson Fuehrer. We're with Biggs Insurance, and I really appreciate all the time you gave to me today. And again, we'll send out the slides within the next 24 hours. Appreciate the time, and look forward to talking to you soon.